Hey everybody! I'm looking forward to doing our webinar again. This is the second time I'm doing this webinar, my Microsoft Teams AppDev Overview. I did one of these last Friday, and now we're doing another one today. What would really help me is for those of you who have connected to the webinar today, if you can just drop something in the chat that you can hear me, that my microphone is working, and that you can, well, obviously you'll be able to see me. But I want to make sure that you can at least hear me. That's obviously one of the very important things in order to have a successful webinar. Let's go ahead and start it and make sure that we don't waste too much time here. So again, I'm going to watch the chat for just a minute, and I want to make sure that that somebody can let me know that, okay, cool. Thank you very much, Oliver. I appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay. First of all, let me do a little bit of housekeeping here. If you have a question, drop it in the chat. I will do my best to answer your questions throughout the webinar. However, I've got a lot of stuff I want to cover today, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to make sure that we don't go too far over, or we don't go over too much. I promise that I will answer every single question that is dropped in the chat. By the time I conclude the webinar. That may mean I go a little bit over, but that's okay. The most important thing is that you get out of this what you need to get out of it, which is answers to your questions, and hopefully I answer a bunch of those ahead of time. If you learned something during the webinar, do me a favor, react, show me like a little bit of love, show me, drop a message in the chat of what you learned as we go along the way. It shows me a little bit of interaction, make sure everything's all, that you can see everything, that you can hear everything. So I would love to know what kinds of things you're learning from this. All right, let's start off with who is this for? So if you have any experience with web development or full stack development, like with JavaScript or TypeScript, this is for you. If you have any experience with the SharePoint Framework or any Microsoft 365 development experience, this is also for you. And you may be surprised, but if you have experience creating Power Apps and you can do some coding, this is also for you. This is not just exclusive just for web developers. If you've been doing anything in the Microsoft 365 space or web development space, you're going to see really quickly how all of the things that you want to build with Microsoft Teams apps, we leverage those existing skills. If you have no experience with the SharePoint Framework, no experience with Microsoft 365 development, no experience with Power Apps, and you're just a web developer, you're going to be just fine. And because you're going to see that Teams does not care what you use to build your app, as you'll see very early on in our webinar. Now, in the chat, do me a favor, do exactly what I did early on in the chat. Where are you calling from? Where are you connecting from? What's your name? I am Andrew Connell from St. John's, Florida, which is just south of Jacksonville, Florida, just north of St. Augustine, in the United States. Now, the other thing that I'm really, really curious about that I would love to hear from everybody is give me some answers to who's on the call, who's joining us in this webinar. How many of you are web developers? What kind of experience do you have with Microsoft 365, maybe SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams Dev, all that stuff. I just dropped what my answers would be for these different questions, so you can get a little bit of an example of what you can put in there. Feel free to copy my response and modify it for obviously your response there. So what kind of experience you have, but it helps me understand the people who are joining this webinar. What kinds of things are you interested in? What kinds of things? What kind of background do you have? So I have a little bit more context on everybody. Tobias from Switzerland, awesome! Thanks for joining me. I can see a bunch of people have joined, but I can't tell where everybody is from yet. So I know I've got one person from Switzerland. So this would be good afternoon, good evening for you. Tobias, for me, it's about lunchtime. So it's about lunchtime for me. So not morning anymore, but I'm sure we have people from all over the place. North Carolina, Cindy, awesome. I've spent a ton of time in the Western North Carolina mountains, right near Waynesville, Silva. My family's I have a bunch of family up there. Let's see, Germany, have not been to Rammstein. Calgary, Canada. Oh yeah, Calgary. Alex Calgary. So I'm thinking it's Alex from Calgary. Let's see, St. Paul, Minnesota. We got somebody from France. Elaine, thank you very much. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Malaysia. That's dialing in from the farthest away. Greg, I recognize that name from Atlanta, Georgia. Recognize that. Joe from Central Virginia, it looks like. We have somebody from Pakistan, from Hyderabad, India, from Michigan. Look at it. I love it. Love it. People from all over the world. This is awesome. Chicago, Sweden, the UK, Iowa, Argentina. This is awesome. I love it. It's one of the things I love about this business. You just people from all over the world get different perspectives. So thank you very much for everybody joining me. Okay, keep those things coming. I'd love to hear more about this. Rob Merritt, I recognize that name from California. Stockholm, Sweden. Okay, Trondheim, Norway. Oh my goodness. I love Norway. I actually was in Trondheim when the volcano in Iceland went off, 10 years ago? I got stuck in Trondheim for an extra week. I wouldn't say stuck. It was actually, I love that. I love Trondheim. It's a beautiful place. Okay, I know you're probably going to laugh at me. I miss Pepe's Pizza. I don't know if that place is still around, but I loved it. Okay, let's get going. I'm gonna do too much of a tangent here. Nobody came in to hear about Pepe's Pizza. Who am I? My name is Andrew Connell. I am a longtime Microsoft 365 developer, dating way back before it was Microsoft 365, before it was Office 365, going all the way back to SharePoint. I started back in September of 2003, and I've lived through all of the SharePoint development models, the add-in model, features and solutions, sandbox solutions, farm trusted solutions, fully trusted solutions. And then also now these days I'm doing stuff with SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Embedded, Microsoft Graph, Microsoft Azure. I live in the 365 space. I'm a 20-year Microsoft MVP. I just got my 20-year renewal, I guess in July, very recently. And you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff here on the slide on how you can find me, how you can connect with me. That voitanos.social and andrewconnell.social, those links take you to like the LinkedIn profile page, where you can kind of see like my NASCAR page of like recent content I've done and all the different social media platforms you can find me on. Best place to find me, LinkedIn. LinkedIn and Threads these days are like where I spend most of my time. Okay. And you can also see how to contact me at the very end on the bottom left there with my email address. Okay, so what are you going to learn today? What kinds of things are you going to pick up? I'm going to run through a bunch of different stuff. We're going to talk about the Microsoft Teams app creation options. We're going to talk about different kinds of apps we can create for both personal apps, channel apps, how we can build conversational bots, how we can do message extensions or message extensions. How to extend Copilot for Microsoft 365 with real-time data, and what does the development story look like? What kind of tools are you going to use? What kinds of hosting and deployment options are you going to need or that are available to you? Now, one of the things that I do want to cover with this that I want to make sure that I'm very, very clear on before we dive in, before I get too far into this, I'm not going to be able to show you a ton of code in this 1 hour webinar session. I have a couple screenshots where I'm going to show you things. But my goal here is primarily to give you an overview on what kinds of things you can build. What things are in the toolbox when it comes to Microsoft Teams for building custom apps that we can take advantage of. What stuff can we do for in Microsoft Teams? So that's my main focus. That's what I want to focus on in making sure that you walk away with this with a bunch of really good information. So this webinar is primarily for you and for you to walk away with this. If you got questions, as I said earlier, drop them in the chat. I promise every question is going to get answered at the end of the webinar. Now, one of the things I do also want to share with you is at the end of this webinar, before I do the questions, I'm going to share with you how we can work together, how you can work with me to learn Microsoft Teams app development faster, to be the irreplaceable expert, delivering more to your customers and your company as well. But don't be mistaken here. Don't tune out. This is going to be 95% educational. I guarantee you that you will get a return on your investment by sitting through this webinar. Later, after the webinar, you're going to get an email with a link to the recording, a link to the slides. Don't worry about taking screenshots of any of this stuff. I'm going to give you access to everything, and it's going to all be delivered to your email, the email that you use to register for this webinar. Now, let's go ahead and dive into this. Section 1. Let's talk about the different app creation options that we have for creating apps for Microsoft Teams. Now, one of the things that a lot of us see that we can do is using Power Apps. Microsoft is all crazy about Power Platform and Power Apps. And people think that I've got this bad attitude towards it or I don't like it. That's not true. I mean, it's not my style of building apps. I'm more of a developer. But I also see that there's always good tools for good scenarios, and there's also tools for bad scenarios. And I'm not saying that Power Apps is going to fit either one of those things. It all depends on the scenario of things that you're building. What I want to do is do a little compare and contrast of what you can do in Microsoft Teams, specifically related to Power Apps. Power Apps is a user-friendly tool for creating simple data entry type apps or management style apps. And you can have some built-in data storage using Dataverse, which is another component of the Power Platform. Now, there's two options for when you go to create Teams apps. You can build directly within Teams, or you can integrate with an existing Power App that's already been deployed for you. But there are some limitations when you're using Power Apps to building applications for Microsoft Teams. You're really limited to just the tab-based user interface that we have inside Microsoft Teams, and you'll understand why in just a few minutes. That means that you are limited to just building like Power Apps or personal apps that are going to live in that left-hand rail of your Teams client, which is really primarily, think of those as like dashboard style apps, apps that are only intended for you and not one to be collaborated on, like your calendar, like your chat, or like seeing a list of all the teams that you've joined. Furthermore, you can also leverage them inside of a tab in a channel within a team. That's really that's the extent of the integration that you can have with Power Apps. Another option that you can have here is you can use the SharePoint Framework to create custom applications for Microsoft Teams. Now, SharePoint Framework is going to enable developers to extend and customize SharePoint and SharePoint Online and Viva connections. And it usually, when it comes to Teams, it usually involves creating a web part that you're then going to expose as a tab to Microsoft Teams. So just really quick, you build this SharePoint Framework web part, you put it in a package. There's one little element in an array that you add a little entry in saying this can be a personal app, or this can be something else, or this can be an app, a tab in a channel. When you package that solution up and deploy it to your tenant app catalog in Microsoft, in SharePoint Online, in the SharePoint Admin Center, there's a little button. It used to be called Sync to Teams, or now it's Publish to Teams. I'm not sure what it's called. It's cloud. Name changes all the time. But there's something in the toolbar that says, if you select the solution that you've deployed, and then you click this button, we're going to package it up and we're going to deploy it over to your Teams app catalog. Now, the way that that's going to work then is that the SharePoint Framework web part is going to be loaded on think of it as a naked page or a plain page where there's no other SharePoint Online stuff on it. What Teams is going to do is when you add the tab to a channel or a personal app that's using the SharePoint Framework web part, Teams is going to take that tab, it's going to load it inside of an iframe, and that iframe target is going to point to that SharePoint Online naked page with something on the query string that says, load this web part on the page. So to the end user, it's just a web, they see it as just a tab. They have no idea that it's running in SharePoint. It's a little bit slower than the native approach that we do to build apps in Teams, but it still works. And that way you can take advantage of all of your existing investments that you've done inside the SharePoint Framework. You can leverage them inside of Teams. Now, there are benefits and there are, let's not call them downsides, but there are benefits to doing this, to using the SharePoint Framework. When you use the SharePoint Framework to deploy your solutions to Teams, well, everything is auto-hosted, which means that all of the files are all going to be deployed into SharePoint Online. So I don't have to have a separate place to go through and to host my application. Tabs in Teams are also implemented as a SharePoint Framework web part, which means they're going to be rendered on a blank SharePoint page within an iframe. I just mentioned that. And then SharePoint Framework is also going to let us leverage some of the APIs that the SharePoint Framework has for calling secure endpoints like Microsoft Graph or SharePoint's REST API or other intra-ID secured endpoints. The app is then deployed to Teams to the Teams App Store through the SharePoint Online catalog. Now, those are some of the benefits that we have out of the box, but there are some limitations if you choose to use the SharePoint Framework. You are limited to the things that you can do when you compare that to stuff that we can do in a native Teams app development, which is what the rest of this webinar is all about. So that means you can't do things that are server-side in nature, like bots or message extensions, or some of the customizations that we can do with Copilot and extending Copilot for Microsoft 365, provisioning or providing Copilot prompts with real-time data, because all of those are web service based. We can do some things with meeting apps, as I'll talk about later, but we can't do everything because, again, some of those things that we can do in a meeting app require a web service. You're also limited or restricted to just client-side technology, which is going to limit the functionality that requires any server-side components. I mentioned this again. The other thing too is that you're forced to use the entire SharePoint Framework build toolchain and all of their dependencies. For example, if you're a React person like me, you're still stuck using React 17. That's over 2 years old. React 19, 2 major versions newer. React 19 is going to ship at the end of September. So we're still way behind. But the reason why it makes it a little bit easier is that the SharePoint Framework kind of has this opinionated way of building solutions for SharePoint, which means you have less kind of stuff to worry about. But as a developer, if you want a lot more flexibility, that kind of is a little bit frustrating because then you're forced to do the things that you're forced to use the tooling and the setup that they provide us. Okay, now let's compare that to if I want to build an app using the Microsoft Teams native app dev approach. Now, native app dev, that's not what Microsoft calls it. In fact, I'm the only one that calls it that because there's no other good name for it. You can say the SDK approach, you could call it the code first approach, you could call it the pro code approach. I call it more the native app dev approach or the full stack. I hate Microsoft's term of pro code because it implies that if you're like a novice or an intermediate developer or you're getting started with this, it's not for you. And that's so far from the truth. It's more of, you could say code first, maybe that's a little bit closer, but for me, full stack makes a lot more sense, partly because it's no longer a buzzword. It's all over all the job boards. So corporations are calling it, or recognize it. But for me, a full stack developer is one who builds web applications and then you build cloud resources that facilitate those web applications, databases, queues, document databases, etc. Okay, so what is the native app dev approach when it comes to Microsoft Teams? This is going to give you the ability to create feature-rich web apps and services that extend the native capabilities we have in Microsoft Teams. We can use these web apps in various types of channels. We could use them or in various types of tabs, such as a channel tab, a group chat tab, or personal apps that contain one or more tabs. You also can create web services, which is going to be the engine that's going to power your bots, your message extensions, all the things that are there for event-driven actions. You also are going to have the ability to do the most flexible customization of your Teams apps. So like, for example, if I build a SharePoint Framework web part that's used in Teams, or if I build a Power App to use in Teams, even if it's used as a tab, there's some things that I can't really do because I can't take advantage of the native stuff that we have in Teams. But when I'm doing this stuff when I do it with a native app dev approach, I absolutely can. I absolutely can do that stuff. This is going to give us the most flexibility and give us the best opportunities for creating collaborative experiences for our users. So, what the heck is a Teams app? Okay, let's dive into this. What is a Teams app? A Teams app, we're developers, so we want to see like nuts and bolts. Let's see what's in the sauce. When you deploy an app to Teams, here's what you do. All you're deploying is a single zip file that contains 3 things. 2 of those things are pictures. They're PNG files, they're images, and they're just used for the branding of the app. The other thing is a JSON file. That's just a manifest file. We call it the app manifest. And all that does is tell Teams, hey, this app can do these things, and that's where you go to get it to implement it. So you don't deploy any code to Microsoft Teams. And when I say code, I mean like real code. I don't mean like over in the Power Platform where they say it's code first when it really is just a bunch of JSON, right? That's not a pot shot at the Power Platform. Maybe it is. Your mileage may vary. I'll let you choose your own adventure on that one. Anybody get that joke? Okay, let's keep going. The other thing that you're going to end up creating to implement your Teams app are cloud resources. Now, this really falls into 2 primary buckets. Now, and then of these buckets, we could depend on other things like databases or message queues or whatever else we want to take advantage of, key stores, stuff like that. You're going to build either a web app. So think about this as a web application, like a single page app, or you can have one that even does the postback style if you wanted to. That's what you're going to use to implement things like tabs or task modules, which is just a Microsoft funny word for funny description for what we all call as dialogues. And then we can also use it to create a meeting app. We'll talk about those more later. The other thing that we can create, web services. So these web services are the engine behind that are going to run bots and message extensions. Now here's the cool thing about this, especially for those of you who are coming from the SharePoint Framework world. Teams doesn't care how you implement or where you host any of this stuff. You could use Node.js, you could use ASP.NET, you could use React, you could use Angular, you could use Svelte, you could use Vue. Teams doesn't care. In fact, I've got a customer who is a full AWS and Java shop that is using AWS and Java to implement their custom bots and tabs for their SaaS-based solution. They didn't think they could do it at first because all the tooling and all the samples all push Azure and Visual Studio Code and Node or ASP.NET. But in reality, it's not that hard to go through and to say, oh, how do I go through and use something else? That means that you can use any technology that you want. As somebody who's a longtime SharePoint Framework developer, it's quite refreshing to use any version of React that I like to use. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a preference thing. So one of the things I want to show you here is this is just a quick little diagram of how this stuff works. Now, when I deploy something to Teams, let's just say it's a tab. I deploy it to Teams. I'm not really deploying a solution to Teams. Instead, what I'm deploying is just that app package, that zip file that contains that manifest. So Teams is going to look at that manifest file to find out, what does this app have in it? What can I use? From there, let's just say it's a tab. Now it needs to know, where do I load this tab? Well, as you're going to see in a minute, a tab in Teams, no matter if it's one that we created or one that Microsoft created, it's just an iframe. It's just a borderless iframe pointing to some other URL of something that's being loaded in the frame below where the little tabbed interface is inside of Microsoft Teams. That's how SharePoint Framework stuff works. That's also how our native tabs work in Microsoft Teams. So here, in my developer experience, as you see, which I got my laptop running down below the Microsoft Cloud. Can't really see it over here, but you can see on the left-hand side, that's my local workstation. Above the black dotted line is the Microsoft Cloud. So here, if I'm in development and I'm testing my environment out, I'm using that orange dotted line to say Teams is going to go load my tab and say, oh, I need to go load a page into the iframe that's running off of Andrew's laptop, right? Make sure it can run off anything. In fact, you can even do all this stuff with a Mac, which is what I do. That's upside down. You can even do it with a Mac. That's how I do all my development. But if you want to use Windows and enjoy your nice frequent breaks with your reboots, that's totally cool. That's a joke. It's a joke. The thing is that's cool about those I say as a joke, but I'm trying to be kind of serious with that. Teams does not care how you build your apps and where you host them and the tools and the technology that you use. It doesn't care. It just cares it's a web app or it's a web service or it's a web service. Now, what about in production? Well, in production, your stuff is going to have to run somewhere else. And for example, maybe it's running in one of the Azure App Services, a container app, maybe just a normal web app. Maybe it's running inside of a Kubernetes container. It doesn't matter. It runs wherever you want it to run. Teams doesn't care, okay? Now, we can get pretty darn complicated with this too, like a meeting app where stuff's going all over the place. So in this case here, you see at the very top, I've still got my app service that you can see right up here at the very top. Where's my mouse? You can see my tab is running right up here. But when I want to talk to say, for example, a web service, Teams never talks directly to my web service. Instead, Teams is going to go through the Azure AI bot service, which is then going to know where my web service is running on my laptop in development, or maybe it's running in an Azure function if it's running in production. Now, why does it do that? Because when the request comes all the way through the Azure AI bot service, that is the only thing that Teams can talk to. So it understands not only how to route it down to my web service wherever it's running, but I'm also going to get context about where the request came from, who sent it, what team, what channel, etc. And when my web service responds, it'll marshal that request back to the original requester, so it'll get slotted where it's supposed to get show up inside of the UX. It also is how, if I'm on, like, say, my mobile device or on the desk or on the desktop, that those messages are going to be sent to whichever client I'm in. So it's not going to be just sent to directly to me, the person who sent it, the actual body, but it would say, like, if I was logged in on my laptop and on my iPad or on my phone, I would see those requests, or on my Windows desktop. Either way, whatever works. Okay, we'll talk more about these guys in a little bit. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, that's just the gist of what a Teams app is. Now let's talk about what a personal app, a channel app, and a group chat is. So here's a common thing that we want to build. This would be a personal app. This is great for like dashboard style stuff. So I use this to help manage like customers, to find out what recent support requests customers have submitted or what questions my students have asked. I do web developer training around the Microsoft 365 stack, so SharePoint Framework and Teams. And when they send a question to my community, I like to see one dashboard of where everything is. I have an app that I've created for this. Here you can see on the left-hand side that I've got this app that I've deployed called my Teams tab 01. Now the dash local, that's just there because I'm doing development. So here, once I've installed my app inside of Teams, you can see that it's going to show up inside of this ... where it'll show up over here on the left hand in the main window of all the apps that have been installed. These are the ones that are just I have access to. Then when I select the app that's been installed, you can see it showing up over here in the left-hand panel of the primary pane inside of Teams, or I could pin it there so I always see this app, as I do with mine for my business. And then in this case here, I've got a couple tabs. You always have the About tab, but I want you to file away for a second. You've got one called Personal tab and one called Simple List. Keep in mind, this whole area down here, this whole area is my iframe where I would be loading my web app. So how does stuff actually run, or how does it get in there? Well, this is a picture of the manifest that we have for a Teams app. And this is where I've defined my personal app. So in my personal app, or in my manifest, I've got this section called Static Tabs. Okay, those of you who are longtime SharePoint people, or at least Microsoft 365 people, just know that Teams isn't special. They are just like the rest of Microsoft, renaming stuff left and right. In fact, if you watched the Wave 2 Copilot announcement earlier today, you saw they were doing it there again too. So death, taxes, and Microsoft renaming things, that's the three things you can guarantee in life. Static tabs are what we used to call personal tabs, which is what we now call personal apps. So I have an array of static tabs. So notice here, there's the name. There's my personal tab. There's my other one, Simple List. Where are these things supposed to be loaded from? Well, the content URL is going to point to my React application, and I'm using the React router to load the tab or to load the Simple List component. That's how it's getting surfaced inside of Teams when someone installs it. Then, so what about if it's a channel tab, right? Or a group chat tab? How would this work? Well, just like tabs, and oh, Fabian's laughing here. It says, ouch, please, Fabian. You know exactly that's true. Microsoft renames stuff left and right. We've been doing this long enough. You laugh because you know it's true. All right, so, and it's fine. It's actually great for business for those of us who are in the education space. So let's talk about, what about if I want to do not just a personal app, but I want to do a channel app? Well, these are just like personal apps, except they're configurable. They can go inside of channels and group chats. Just like a personal tab or a personal app, they all live inside of an iframe. For these, you're going to use the JavaScript SDK just like you would in the personal app. But there's a JavaScript SDK that Teams gives us, and we can use that to communicate with the hosting Teams client. That'll give us things about the context of Teams. So what team am I in? What channel am I in? What other stuff, like who the current user is, and what's the current theme. Because if I build my app and the users switch from the light default mode of Teams to the dark mode, I want my app to look just like that. I don't want it to look different. It would look so weird if I was in this light mode and then all of a sudden I'm in this dark mode inside of my iframe. That doesn't look good. That's not good for a user experience. So not only can I detect what theme I'm in, but if the user changes it, I can be notified so I can switch out and use a different style sheet. I also can use this SDK for single sign-on. My app can ask Microsoft Teams, who is the current user that's logged in? And Teams, in conjunction with Entra ID, is going to give me back an access token. We call it, or technically it's called an OpenID Connect token that contains 4 elements on it: the tenant ID, the object ID of the user inside of the current of their tenant, their display name, and their UPN, their login. I can use that to uniquely identify who the current user is, and I can use that as the basis to obtain an access token to Microsoft Graph to get even more content with this. Lewis got a great question there. iframe, what about responsiveness? it's how Teams works, that iframe. You don't have to worry about it. It's all implemented inside of there. Teams, obviously, if you scale Teams way down, it gets less and less useful. But your app, you can have it be as responsive being in like a mobile experience and have your app be responsive inside the iframe, and just trust that Teams is going to go through and to scale it the way that you want it. If you take any Teams tab and you scale the Teams client way down, you'll see how the responsiveness works. Now, another thing that you can do is you can make your app look just like Teams, and you can do that using what's called Fluent UI React. Fluent UI is Microsoft's design language. There was a web implementation of Fluent UI that Microsoft created, the Microsoft design team created, that they use, and then they created a bunch of React controls that they use to implement things like SharePoint, Outlook.com, Teams, you name it, all the Microsoft 365 properties. They make that same library available for us to use as well, so we can use the same kind of look and feel. Our drop downs will look the same, our radio buttons will look the same, buttons will look the same, and there's even a theme provider that we can use as well. Oh, Richard asked, what is Intra ID? Intra ID is the renamed Azure AD. It is Microsoft's identity platform. So it's how do we log in? How do we identify who somebody is? So Intra ID is Azure AD. In fact, it really is just that part of Intra, it's just a rename from Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. Good question. Okay, so what do these look like? How do we get these surfaced? The way that these are going to work is that in your manifest, you're going to have this thing called a configurable tab. Again, channel tabs used to be called configurable tabs. Why? Because we can customize them. How can we customize them? Well, in this case here, notice that I've got this configuration URL property in the manifest. That's going to point to a page that is going to, when I go to add my tab to a channel, Teams is going to open up a dialog, and in this dialog, from like right about here all the way down to where this other cursor is, that's an iframe, and my settings page is going to load, or my configuration page is going to load. That allows me to collect information from the user that I then want to use to customize the tab. So like, for example, in this example, I'm going to have a very simple tab that's going to act like a calculator. So I need to know what kind of operation are we doing. Another one that we have could have one that's a mapping solution. So what do you want to choose? Do you want to use Bing Maps, Apple Maps, or Google Maps? You can choose from that option. So when the tab is added to the channel, it's going to default to that mapping solution. All right. Now, so how does this work? So this slide, the sequence diagram just kind of explains what the flow looks like. It's a very high level UML sequence diagram. So on the right hand side, these two things with tab settings page and tab page, that's what we create as developers. The purple teams, that's what Microsoft created. So what's this experience look like? The user is going to go in and say, I want to add a tab to a channel. Teams is going to open up that settings page, request, or the settings dialog, issue a request to your web server, your cloud resource, to go load that settings page and display it in that dialog. You are then going to interact with that settings page, save your changes. That settings page is then going to save the tab's configuration back to Teams, and now the tab is going to load in Teams. The user is going to then browse to the tab, or Teams is going to take them to that tab. And then when the tab loads, it's going to load the content URL property on the tab that you created from your cloud resources and display that inside of an iframe. Wait a minute, what is this tab config thing? How is it saving this? The way it's saving it is right here. So over here on the right-hand side, this is the code that you would normally see inside of a settings page for a configuration tab. The way that this works is when the page loads. So think of this code right. This is React using React hooks. If you're not familiar with this, if you are familiar with it, you know what this is, or you know what the syntax is, the use effect with the context. If you're not familiar with this, think about this as like the body on load event or the on init event for a SharePoint Framework component. Effectively, what I'm doing is, in this case here, I'm saying that when someone clicks the save button, I want to run this code right here, which is what we'll look at in a second. Then I'm going to take that save button in the bottom right corner I showed you on like 2 slides ago. By default, it's disabled. I'm going to enable it. Because in my case here, I don't have any logic that I want to do to make sure that this is a valid, that they're valid settings that have been added. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to say, go ahead and enable the thing. But if I was collecting some required data for my tab, I could choose when I set the validity state of my settings page and to true, which would enable the save button. Then I'm going to tell Teams I'm ready for this, for the user to have access to the settings page. So they go through and they select which math operation they want and they click save. So that's going to trigger my on-save handler, which is over here. Here's the save event. What is that going to do? The gist of it is this set config. I'm using the Teams JavaScript SDK and calling Microsoft Teams.pages.config set config. This object that I'm passing in is my new tab. And if you'll recognize some of these properties look just like what we had on a personal app. Things like the entity ID or like the content URL or the website URL. You know, when you've gone to a tab and there's a little web globe icon in the top right corner or in the settings drop down for the tab, you can say like open in a website. That's where I would want to use that. So why would I use that? So let's say I created something for like a CRM thing that I want to be able just to see a specific customer on my tab. Maybe in that experience, my tab, I don't want to show all of the extra Chrome and UX related to my CRM app. Instead, I just want to see the customer details. But if I want to see the customer in my CRM application, that's what the website URL could be to go pop me out to like Dynamics 365 Sales or to Salesforce. Okay. You also have this remove page so that when you delete the tab from the channel, you can have your own code pop up in another dialog that will then go through and do any cleanup stuff. All right. And then once you've created that, you're just going to tell Teams, save successful, ta-da, tab shows up. And you get something that looks like this for our simple math calculator. Really simple stuff. Okay. Those are my tabs. Let's talk about conversational bots. Now I'm going to go through the rest of this. That's the most common thing I see us people build. But now I want to go through and show you a bunch of other things we can build inside of Microsoft Teams. And Chris, I see your question. Rich, I see your question. I'm going to do those at the very end because I want to make sure that I don't lose people. And I do all the questions at the very end of the webinar. But I will come back to you, Chris and Richard. Okay, conversational bots. What are these? This is just simply a way for us. Everybody's familiar with a chat bot, right? Everybody's familiar with a chat bot. So you know how to mention a bot and have a conversation with it. That's what these are. But they're not just this. This whole infrastructure that we have using bots allows us to do a lot of stuff like additional, think about it as like orchestration stuff inside of our Teams apps. All right. So in a conversational bot, the conversational bot is when it's installed inside of a channel or a group chat, it is only going to get the messages when it's mentioned. Think about that as like the person in the meeting that is always tuned out, is always just sitting there just looking at their phone. They're not paying attention to the meeting. And then someone's like, at Andrew, yes, sorry, yes, you now you have something for me to do. Okay. When you mention the bot, that's when he's going to get the message. And when he gets the message, he's going to get a whole bunch of context as well. And when he can then respond with either a text-based response or even an adaptive card. Or as you'll see in a minute, we can even pop open a dialogue. It's pretty cool. However, if you're in a personal chat, which is just a one-on-one chat with the bot, every message that the user sends will be sent to the bot. Now, the messages that are sent in the channel app, you say like, well, wait a minute. Is there a way for me to do these channel-based what's it called? Is there a way to get all the messages that are being posted in a channel by the bot? Yes, there is. It's not like a native thing the bot can do, but the bot can use Microsoft Graph webhooks to subscribe to the channel and to get notified whenever there's a new message and act on those. But it's kind of like an out of band thing, but it's totally supported and you can definitely do that. Okay. What else can we do with these bots? I went through a UX that kind of looked like this earlier, a slide earlier about our meeting app. That the meeting app though also had the web interface to it as well, the tabs. So this is just showing you basically the same thing I showed you earlier, just a little simplified version of it. Okay, so when you go to build your bot, okay, you actually have two options of how you want to build it. You can use the Bot Framework SDK, which is the original way of building a bot. It's more, I don't want to say legacy, but it's more like explicit, more declarative. Like if I have a bot that knows how to turn lights on and off, I have to explicitly tell the bot, at lightbot, turn lights on. So do like a /light on command. If I just say, hey bot, can you turn the lights on or can you enable the lights? It's not going to know what to do. It's not going to know what to do. Now I could have gone through and done a bunch of extra code to figure out what the user's intent was, but that's going to be really hard to do. Instead, the way it works is we give hints to the user on what things the bot can do, and the bot has to explicitly tell it what to do. That's the original way of building bots. It worked great. It still works great. It's not going anywhere. It's very stable, and it's also very cheap. A new way of doing it, which is much more popular, which it's a little bit more expensive, is using a library called the Teams AI library. Now, what this does, the biggest benefit that the Teams AI library is going to do is two things in my mind. One, it's the augmented generation of text, right? So you can go through and let the bot get kind of creative on how it responds to the users. But the part that's really powerful is that last bullet point you see, extracting the user's intent with natural language. So I could tell the bot, hey bot, it's dark in here. Like right now, it just got dark in here. Oh crap. So I say, hey Lightbot, it's dark in here. Can you help me with that? The bot responds back, yes, I can turn the lights on. Would you like me to do that? And I respond, yes. And the bot's like, cool, lights are on. So what's cool about that then is the bot can have can deduce user intent, and I can have more of a conversation with it. And granted, there's a little more cost associated with it because we're using large language models. They're not cheap. We've all paid attention to the news the last couple of years. And there's a little bit extra that you're going to have to pay for this. But the customer or the user quality of their experience, the quality of their experience that they're having, I'm trying to figure out the right word to say there, is much, much better when you're using the Teams AI library. The Teams AI library, the way that this works is, what it does is you see here is that for the most part, all it really does is it just snaps in and replaces the bot framework. So it actually is built on top of the bot framework. It still is leveraging the same like engine and the same like plumbing. But you see here that now as the developer, I'm going to go through and do some prompt engineering and some configuration of my bot. And I'm going to teach the bot that it's a light bot and it understands how to do the command light on. So when the user has a prompt that says, hey, it's dark in here, can you help me with that? The bot can say, hey, based on all the knowledge that I've gained from being trained by OpenAI, I know that person is probably asking about turning the lights on. That's a solution for a dark room. So I know how to do light on. I'll ask the user, do you want me to turn the light on? And when they say yes, I've just mapped their intent. And what I do is then the bot will then respond back to my code, or the LLM using the Teams AI library will respond back to my code with the command of light on. And that's where my actions are going to be pinned to the custom code that I want to write that knows how to use the Internet of Things to go turn the light on. Lewis, I see your question. I'm going to come back to that. Okay. I want to make sure I get all our questions done. So I'll come back to you. The cool thing with the Teams AI library is that this OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, the Teams AI library is written to work with either one. So it's much more, it's like a standards-based thing on working with different models here. I had a question in the last webinar. Well, what if I don't want to use OpenAI? What if I want to use Claude? What if I want to use one of the other large language models, like something from Hugging Face? You can totally do that. The Teams AI library, 100% open source. You can use, you can see how Microsoft did it, and you can implement your own stuff as well. There's no magic behind it. There's no like server-side stuff. You can do it the exact same way. You can do it how they did it as well. Okay, here's an example of like a bot. In this case here, over on the top left, I asked the bot that I want to go watch a video, and the bot responded with an adaptive card. The adaptive card had 3 buttons on it. These 2 buttons right here, I could click one of these 2 buttons, and what will it do? It will send a message over to my bot that will respond back to Teams and say, go launch a dialogue with this web page in it. This is called a dialogue, or in Teams parlance, a task module. I had to use the web page option to implement my task module because the YouTube video player doesn't work inside of adaptive cards. It only works inside of a browser-based experience. So that's why this is implemented using the browser experience. But if I chose the 3rd button, launch the selector, that's going to send a message over to Teams. Now this is where things get really cool. Sends a message over to Teams. Teams can respond with an adaptive card for the task module, which will display it right here. And when I click update the selected video based on either picking a video or plugging in the YouTube video ID, it will then send it back to the bot, the web service. The bot will then respond with a new adaptive card, with a new task module that'll replace the existing one in the pop-up. Furthermore, bots can respond to Teams and say, update the existing message. This is how I use it in my business. I have an adaptive card that pops up showing a customer. And then when I click on stuff on the buttons, it just keeps refreshing that same card with new adaptive cards to show me more information and more actions I can take on that user. It's really cool. I see SN says, can we run the bot in different technology instead of Azure Bot Service? So the Azure Bot Service, that is, no code is running in the Azure Bot Service. That is simply just, think of it as a router, right? That's all it really is. You said, can you use Next.js? Absolutely you can. I do all my stuff in Node.js. But on the UI stuff, I like using Remix, which is like a server-side version of React plus Node. Makes life really easy. So can you use Next.js? Absolutely. But you do have to use the Azure AI Bot Service to be able to connect to it. The Azure AI Bot Service is, don't think AI is like, oh my God, it's going to cost a whole bunch of money. Literally, it used to be called the Azure Bot Service, and then Microsoft threw AI in there because they're throwing AI on everything, like Copilot is, there's like 50,000 Copilots now in Microsoft. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. I'm actually running a little bit behind, so I'm going to run a few minutes over here, but I want to make sure that we get through the other 2 or 3 things that I want to highlight with this. I want to go through 2 or 3 things. Okay. I see your question, Andrew. I'm going to come back to that. All right. Another thing that we can do, we can augment messages. We can do this using message extensions. 3 types of message extensions. Link unfurling. If I drop a link into a new message, if it meets a specific pattern that I've defined inside of my manifest, that is going to send that link over to my web service, and I can choose how to respond, such as using an adaptive card that will get added to the message so people can have a little bit of preview. So I do that if I drop a link to a customer that's listed inside of my CRM, or in this case here, I've dropped a link to a planet on Wikipedia, and I've added in an adaptive card with some information about the planet Mercury. I can also use action command. I'll show you this one in just a minute. My acronyms explained. This is one that I do in my class. What this action command is that when I'm on a message, I can choose the ... and then choose one of my actions that have been installed. So if I choose more actions, that's where all the actions are available. The last 3 that have been used are going to show up right here. I'll show you this one in just a minute. All right, it's pretty cool how this one works. So that's going to allow me to either pop open a dialog or to send a message over to my web service that can go start a long-running task, or to start an approval process or something like that, or go report someone for being like naughty in a chat. The last one, you've probably all used this one. Well, not the one you see in the screen, but you have one called a search command. You ever been in Teams? You ever gone to go create a brand new message and you clicked one of those little icons down here at the bottom for doing an animated GIF? It's a search-based action command. Here in this case here, I've got one that every intranet should have, which is you want to be able to show one of the most recent pictures from the Perseverance rover that's going on Mars right now using the live data from the NASA imagery API, right? I mean, I do. You should too, I would think. I'm a space geek, sorry. In this case here, what I did is I created a message extension, and when I click the little icon for my app, it shows me a search command, and it shows that's one of my message extensions, and the other one's called the NASA Mars rover. So here I pick this one, I plug in a little search term, and it shows me a grid of pictures, or I can show it as a list if pictures aren't really applicable for this. When I pick one, it gets added to the message, or it's going to automatically add it to the entire thread. Now, let's think about this acronyms explained for a minute here. Actually, wait, hold on a second. Where can we use these things? Well, the link unfurling, the first one we looked at here, this guy is only available in the message box at the very bottom. When I look at the other options, I have the option at the very top for the command box. We have the message option over here, and we have the compose area. The action commands can be used from the command box and from the message box. These search commands can be used from the compose area and from up here at the top as well. Okay, those are the different places where you can use these guys inside of a message. And I talked about these. Now, I showed you this slide a minute ago. I'm going to come back to it. Now let's look at this action command here. Acronyms explain. How does this guy work? What happens with this one, the way that I've set this up, is that we've all worked in a business where we have like lots of different 3-letter acronyms, right? So in this case here, as you can see in the background, I have this message called, I've used SP 2013. I don't work on-prem. I only do SPFx for SPO using VSC. Somebody new to the company is like, What? Well, if they pick the message and they choose the acronyms explained, they're going to launch the decrominizer. Get it? It's acronyms. Let's de-acronym them. So it's the decrominizer. It's acronyms explained. And it's simply going to go through and find all of the different acronyms and show me a description. And when I click on Unleash the Decrominizer, what this can do is either I can post straight to the thread, or I can add this to a new message where someone could then augment it and add additional stuff. All right, third to the last thing, meeting apps. These things, super complicated. We can do tons and tons of stuff like this with these. This is allowing you to install an app inside of your meeting, okay? Now, at the top there, you can see what I'm doing in the slide. I click on the little plus when I've created a meeting in Teams. I then open the meeting up in Teams, not connect to it, but I double click it. And when I literally double click on it, not the figure of speech like double click that people are using, I click the little plus icon to add a tab. I choose my meeting or my app that I've installed. And once I've gone through and I've installed that app, you'll now see I have this tab in this experience of the meeting where I can now have an iframe. This tab is just a configurable tab. It's just like a channel tab, except it runs inside of a meeting. Now I can have an experience that I put down here. I can maybe look at the start time and the end time of the meeting to be able to show a pre and post experience based on the meeting's life cycle, right? So this is the area where I have access to go through and to add anything that I want for my meeting app. But that's not all. You know when you're inside of a meeting and it looks like this? I mean, not everybody's smiling. We're all in a meeting, so nobody's smiling in a meeting. But when you're in a meeting and you're looking at stuff like this, what else can we do? We can also create custom experiences for the side panel on the right-hand side or in the meeting stage right in the middle. Those are also tabs. They're just channel tabs that you can use and you can create. You have the full experience of what you want to deploy there. You choose to activate the app using that little, well, in this case here, my app icon is a little snowflake. But if I pick that, it'll launch the side panel. And then there's a share button. You don't see it right now, but the share button will show up right below the leave right here. That's what will allow me to deploy another interface into my meeting stage. And that's not all. You also can go in and use a message extension to launch a little pop-up dialog. These are really useful. Let's say we're all in a meeting right now, right? We're all in a meeting and I want to ask one of you a question. I can launch this message extension that's going to go straight to one person. Let's just say it goes straight to the last person that left a message in the chat is Andrew. Well, that doesn't work because now it looks like I'm talking to myself. Thanks, Andrew G. Let's say Lewis. I send a message straight to Lewis. This is now allowing my app to have a conversation with Lewis, but not in the entire thread of the meeting. It's like a little private message to find out from Lewis if he has a specific question about something or get some feedback. That's kind of cool. And I could even create bots that will allow me to get all the chat messages coming from during the entire meeting. Okay, that's a meeting app. Let's touch on what we can do with Copilot. Now there's a lot of stuff you can do here with Copilot extensibility. I just want to talk about one thing specifically in here that shows you some really cool stuff that you can do to really augment Copilot. Now, Copilot, if you think about it, when you run a prompt in Copilot for Microsoft 365, think that it has two databases. Like think it's got two giant dictionaries in its head. One is everything that the model has been trained with, right? So by crawling the internet. And the other one is all the data inside of our Microsoft 365 tenant that's coming from Graph. So that's all of this stuff that you see over here on the right-hand side, now, or on the left-hand side. I also can provide additional data to and create a third knowledge bubble by preloading a ton of content that is all unstructured. Think like documents, think like knowledge-based stuff. I could shove all of this stuff inside of Microsoft Graph. The content is not browsable. So it's not like I'm loading it into a document library in SharePoint. It's not browsable, but the content is now accessible to Graph. So now when my user sends a prompt to Copilot, it not only has all the data it's been trained on, all of the data from Graph, but it also has all this other domain knowledge that I've learned. So like I have a customer who's going to do this with a bunch of, I can't be too specific here, but a lot of like really secretive safety stuff that they can't allow that content to get out and be like be made public. So they don't want it like in a SharePoint document library. Hello, Ed Snowden. So they want to make things a little more they want to make things a little bit more secure, but they want the content to be accessible to the end users. So they can still ask Copilot for questions about the safety stuff and get responses right away, right? So this is a really cool option here. And I saw Fabian's comment about a great slide. Yes, I totally lifted this from these next two, this slide and the next one, actually 3 slides from a presentation from the Microsoft Build Conference. I think these are great slides explaining how this stuff works. Those are called Microsoft Graph connectors. They have nothing to do with Teams apps, okay? Nothing to do with Teams apps. The one that does is a thing called a plugin. Now, these things are awesome. What a plugin is it allows me to inject real-time data into a prompt. So again, let's go back to the last example. I prompt Copilot. I've got data that I've got. Copilot has its knowledge that it's been trained on, and then it's got knowledge from Microsoft Graph. What about real-time stuff about my inventory? Or what about something even more important? Like if I asked it for like recent pictures from the NASA Mars Perseverance rover, stuff that every internet should have, right? Well, what I can do is I can actually take that message extension that I showed you on that last in the last demo that I could use to get like images from NASA. And all I have to do is go add in a single property to the description of my plugin. And it's called a semantic description, where I get very, very descriptive and basically prompt Copilot to say, now you know how to get data from the NASA Imagery Web Service. You can do that using this plugin. Here are the different ways you can do it. The user's going to be at. You basically are going to teach Copilot to identify a prompt when someone is asking for this kind of content. And then on all the properties that your message extension is going to go call out to that can call to some remote web service, each one of those properties or parameters are also going to have a semantic description property that you can just use to give Copilot additional training information. Again, it's also the semantic description property, so that Copilot can look at your prompt and say, oh, the user is asking for pictures from this date or from this Mars rover, Perseverance or Spirit or Opportunity or Curiosity. I told you I was a space geek. You can't see all the pictures, all the Lego above me. That's all like NASA space stuff. You can see the cars though, I think. You can see the cars. Yeah. Okay, there you go. There's one thing right there. There's the Saturn rocket. All right, that's not what you came for. Let's go back to this. All right, so that's what's cool about these plugins is that now it can identify a prompt that you have. It identifies it can go fetch additional information so that now when you prompt Copilot, it's not just getting data from content inside that it's been trained on, content from Microsoft Graph, but now it's also getting data from the NASA Imagery Web Service, or in a real world scenario, real-time customer data or real-time inventory data, stuff like that. That's pretty cool. Real-time ticketing information. That's super powerful. Now that's just the message extension option. There's also a way to do this using what are called API plugins. This is more that you create a separate web service, and instead of having to create the Teams app, you create an API plugin that you then can make Copilot aware of. The thing is that you still register this using the same Teams app manifest, since the primary way of using Copilot for Microsoft 365 is through Teams. So you can use your existing investments with a message extension and or you can use API plugins. Okay, so that just one more slide. That just kind of shows you, hey, the data is not coming from Graph, but Copilot is going to go ask stuff about information coming over here from these API plugins. Okay, you're a developer. You're like, so what do I need to do this stuff? How do I get started? All right, well, let's talk about that. Oh, I keep meaning, I meant to delete this slide last time. Let me skip this slide. I meant to delete it. All right, put me over here. So what do you need? I want to get started. What do I need to play with? You have to decide. You got some stuff you're going to have to deploy. You got stuff you're going to create. So what am I going to create? Where's my code going to be hosted? And what does my code use? So you have to figure out where's my stuff going to get deployed. Those are cloud resources, your web app, your web services, your database, your file storage, you name it. All that stuff of where you're going to go create stuff, where you're going to save it. You have to decide where it's going to go. That is up to you as the developer. If you're familiar with the old SharePoint add-in model, think of this as kind of like the provider hosted add-ins. You're responsible for creating this stuff. You're responsible for hosting it. Which means you also get the full choice of what technology and what resources you choose to use, not ones that are dictated to you by Teams or Microsoft 365 or Microsoft. Where's your app going to be surfaced? It's going to be surfaced in Microsoft Teams, which means the only thing you have to deploy to Teams is your app manifest. And that manifest contains, or the app package, and that package is going to contain the 2 pictures, the icons for your app, and your manifest, which is going to tell teams where all your cloud resources are living. Now, what do you need to go do the development? I got my laptop. I want to go do my work. How do I get started with this? What you're going to want, you're going to need a tech stack, right? That's up to you. That's like any other project you're going to create. Node.js or like, forget who asked earlier, can I use Next.js? Absolutely. You can use Next.js. You choose whatever tech stack you want. Node.js, Next.js, ASP.NET, Java, PHP. If you're using PHP, I'm sorry. But you can use whatever you want to use. You just haven't taken your pills yet. That's okay. The other thing that you're going to need is you're going to want to use the Teams Toolkit. Now, everyone thinks the Teams Toolkit is a Visual Studio Code extension. Nah, it's not. The Teams Toolkit is a suite of things. So you've got a Teams Toolkit extension for Visual Studio, you've got one for Visual Studio Code, and you've got a CLI. The thing is, it really comes down to the CLI. I'll come back to that question, Lewis. The CLI is going to have the ability to understand what a Teams app is. There's a whole like project structure. There's a whole different environment structure you can have with like local dev, QA, staging, test, production. Kind of went through that the wrong order. QA, staging, test. Test, QA, staging, production. There you go. But you can have these different environments set up as well for your projects. And the Teams Toolkit, the CLI, makes it easy to go through and do this. The Visual Studio Code extension and the Visual Studio extension, those use the CLI under the covers to go do the deployment, the packaging, and all that kind of stuff, the builds, the testing, and everything. You also are going to need a Microsoft 365 tenant to be able to do your testing. This is a link that talks about the Microsoft 365 developer program. Right now, it's hard to get these tenants because Microsoft is in this like security lockdown for trying to address when they got hacked back in January, use of the Midnight Blizzard hack. We expect these to come back at the end of the year, beginning of next year. At least that's what Microsoft told me about a month ago. Originally, they said it'd be back in September. I was like, it's almost September. And they're like, yeah, I think like end of the year, beginning of next year. I'm like, oh, okay. So now I'm thinking like second quarter of next year. I don't know. Everything slides. We'll see. But they are going to come back. Worst case scenario, you need a 365 tenant. If you don't have one, there's a way that you can get a 1-month trial for one. Or what I would recommend you do to try it out, get a Business Essentials license. It's $6 a month with a 1-year commitment, which means you're spending $72 to do Teams AppDev. All of your tools are free. Your Azure, you can get $150 or $200 in credit with Azure. You can be pretty darn productive for spending less than $100 for an entire year. So I don't think that's that big of an ask, especially with the stuff that we're potentially looking at. Okay, so after going through all of this stuff, excuse me, what do you think? Sound interesting? Anybody interested in like doing Teams AppDev now that you've seen like what's possible? There's a whole lot of stuff that you can build with this. It's really cool. Now, what I want to do though is I want to share something else with you, okay? If you liked all of this, I'd like to tell you how I can help you do this. Now, I'm gonna answer your questions, but first I want to share something with you. If you like this, I want to tell you how I can help you. I have a thing called the Microsoft Teams AppDev Accelerator. It's a cohort style course that starts this week. The next cohort starts on Wednesday of this week. It's a cohort style course that helps you learn Microsoft Teams app development faster to be the irreplaceable expert, delivering more to your company and or your customers. Now, I've done this 3 times now. I've taught this course 3 different times over the last year, starting with about this time last year as my first cohort that I ran. Former students that have been through this, they absolutely love it. Over 70% of my students give me glowing reviews for this, including Adam from the United Kingdom, who is a Power Apps developer and wanted to learn more about what we could do with Teams. And he really, really enjoyed the course, as you can see here. This accelerator, no fluff, no BS, no basic info. Nothing is held back. I'm going to tell you everything that I know about Teams AppDev, including my experience of teaching for Microsoft, teaching Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Teams AppDev to their customers over the course of 9 months. If you're familiar with any of the learning modules and stuff that we have out there for Microsoft Teams, Microsoft hired me to create a bunch of those that are all on Microsoft Learning. A lot of the ones I've done, they're now outdated because they're a couple years old. But that's one of the reasons why I created this, is I saw the information that was out there, and that there's a better way to teach this stuff, especially from my experience in teaching for Microsoft. When they gave me the content that they wanted me to teach for 9 months, we weren't seeing the success that they wanted to see. I kind of asked if I could go and do my own way for a month. I did. Our success metrics shot up by 4 times, and then they went back to the old way of doing it. I don't know why. We proved that something worked. But that's what inspired me to create my own program. This is a list of everything that I teach you in the course. Everything that we went through today, and a whole heck of a lot more, including single sign-on, going into a lot more depth of stuff that we didn't do today. But you actually see the real details of actually creating this stuff. Now, unlike other courses that you might go through, you're not going to learn passively. This is an active learning experience. You're going to create real-world projects and learn real-world debugging and troubleshooting tactics with me. In fact, I encourage everybody who joins me to show up with a real-world project, either one you've contrived or one that you have to build for your company or one of your clients, because we can build it throughout the entire class. You're going to learn throughout the entire program of how to do this. You're also going to network and build friendships and partnerships and relationships with other developers that are in your cohort. A lot of my students still interact with each other. And as a whole, we all keep interacting with each other. Now, I want to answer a couple of the questions I usually get about my program before I answer the questions that you guys have posted in the chat. How is this different from other kinds of programs? Well, in a self-paced course where you go buy the course, you watch it on your own time, there's no accountability. Kind of hid that one a little bit here. Let me get rid of that. You don't want to sit there and be fully accountable just to yourself. You need some sort of external accountability to really get this stuff done. That's one of the things we do here. You'll see, I'll talk about the schedule for this and how we can actually dive into it. You're also going to have live discussions with a subject matter expert and your peers. Unlike a self-paced course, you don't get to do that. But in this, you do. We're going to work together. And I have a very structured way and curated path of how you're going to learn Microsoft Teams AppDev. Now, what about those in-person classes? They're great for like 5 days, 3 days, maybe a full day workshop, but they require travel. That's expensive. And sitting in a classroom all day, listening to an instructor, that's mentally draining. That's physically draining. That's exhausting. So you get burned out. It's hard to think critically when you get burned out and you get taxed like that. So with this program, that's not going to happen. You'll see why when I talk about how we structure the class in just a minute. The other stuff that we have, you're not going to compromise on your billing utilization. This is only going to take 15% of your time every single week that we go through and we do this program over the course of 8 weeks. Your billing rate's going to plummet to 0. You're not going to have people calling you during class and it's going to say, hey, I need you to deal with this fire drill here, because you're going to be able to have access to join the class when it best fits you, either live or during the recordings that are made available if you had to step away during one of the live sessions. There's also no pressure to get all your answers addressed in that first week, because we have a long time we're going to spend together. So you don't have to feel stressed to do this. You're going to be fresh every time we show up, because we're only going to get together 2 hours twice a week. And when we're not together, you have full access to me for asynchronous coaching for the duration of the entire program. It's like free consulting. I will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. We do everything inside of Teams, post your question to Teams, and I will get back to you every single question that every single person submits. So what does the format of this look like? This is a quote here from one of my students, Ellie from Norway. Ellie actually showed up to the program with a solution that they had just bought from another company, and they were taking their solution and they wanted to port it to a Teams app. So over the course of the entire class, we kept going back and forth, not just Ellie and I, but other students, on how to architect the solution to be a Teams app. The program is 8 weeks long. We get together twice a week on Wednesdays and Mondays for 2 hours. The timing is from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. On Wednesdays is when I teach. That's when I teach a concept and I show you real demos from real apps that are the real custom apps that we've built. Now, I don't build them live. Instead, right when the class is over, I then turn around and I give you self-paced videos that show how I've walked through and built the app from file new project all the way to the very end. All right. That way you can follow along and you can build the exact same app on your own if you choose. If you have questions after the class, you ask questions in our Microsoft Teams team that we set up for this, and I get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. That's the asynchronous coaching. You've got the rest of the week to work on the homework. You've got the weekend to work on the homework. If you like work for yourself or something and you can't take time out of your day job. And at the very end, or the following Monday, we get together with we can get together and we do an office hour session for 2 hours on Monday. No agenda in office hours. That is just there to answer questions about what we covered in the class or anything else related to Microsoft 365 Dev that you want to talk about, including Copilot, SharePoint Framework, you name it. In fact, sometimes we even use these office hour sessions to cover additional content that I didn't have originally in my plan, but people that were attending wanted to learn more about it. It's also available for extended learning. This is the asynchronous coaching that we have here. Jono from Utah was one of my students recently. He said he absolutely loved this because he got like real-time responses to his questions, real detail. He was a big fan of the when he was posting the content using posting questions using Loom, like I'm doing, like I like to go respond to people, and it allows us to go through and to do these different changes here. Constantinios, sorry for mispronouncing that. I see your question. I will address it at the very end here. I do have an answer to that one, but I want to get through this and jump into the questions really quick. Let's see, what else did I want to cover here with the different slides before I dive into this? You can also learn at your own pace. Those live sessions, if you can't make it live, they're all recorded and they're all posted within about an hour or two of the session ending, so that you can have access to it in case you're in a time zone where things get late, or it's too early or something, or you've got some fire drill at work that you can't miss. You'll be able to answer any of those questions. You don't have to worry about falling behind too, because none of the homework builds on each other. Single sign-on, I've even made it nice and like atomic. A lot of people ask, yeah, but is this really for me? What's the level of development skill that I need for this? I see, Lewis, your question, this might address that. I've had people who are experienced web developers, people who have zero experience with Microsoft Teams, people who have some web development experience, people who have no experience with Microsoft 365, people who are just Power App developers, people who are executives and are more in business management. So all of those things, like all those people have been through my class, they've been able to stay with it. I will help, even if you don't have the experience or you haven't done this before, we will make sure, I really encourage in that first week, let's build the very first project and make sure we get your development environment working as soon as possible so you're successful early on. Every single video that I give you, we walk through step by step by step. We will make sure that you are successful in every single homework assignment that you choose to do. I promise. That's my promise and my commitment to you. And again, not just for developers. Kurt Rowland is from Missouri. Kurt and I still stay in touch. He is a solutions lead and a principal architect. He wanted to know more about what was available for us to build for Microsoft Teams app so that he could speak to his customers more intelligently about this stuff. And then Matej from Slovenia. I believe it's Slovenia. I think it's Slovenia. It's either Slovenia or Slovakia. I keep getting mixed up there. He absolutely loved the course. Not only love it, one of the things he loves about it is that he is going to get access, just like everybody else who registers for my accelerator. You get access to all of my future courses that I plan on publishing around Microsoft Teams AppDev. I have a couple self-paced courses that I'm working on now that should be published over the next couple months, and you will get access to those when they go live as part of your accelerator registration. And then there's also the curated learning. Nello from Switzerland was also a big fan of the fact that I had a very specific path on how we follow things. All of these testimonials are all available to you on my website as well. This one from Paul in Virginia, this is one I wanted to call out. Paul had not done any Teams app dev before my accelerator. During the accelerator, he built 2 apps. He published them to the Teams app store, started selling them, and within about a month or two of the accelerator finishing, he made enough revenue to pay for the accelerator, to pay it back, and he's still making more money on those apps. I can't guarantee you, like I say, results may vary here. I can't guarantee you that you're also going to sit there and you're going to make money off your apps, because it all depends on your implementation and your idea. But I do have a section where I don't normally go over it, but if you're interested, during one of the office hour sessions, I show you what the monetization story looks like and what the process looks like in creating a SaaS offer for your solutions. So if you are ready to start learning Microsoft Teams app development faster, to be the irreplaceable expert delivering more to your customers, then I invite you to join me for the next cohort. The next cohort starts on Wednesday. Tomorrow is the last day to register for it. I cap the cohort at 25 students. That way that we can have a very intimate and relationship and conversation, so that we're not going to end up having a lot of people talking over each other and not having a chance to get your questions in. The registration cost for the cohort is $3,500 per student. However, the first 15 seats are discounted at 30% off at $2,500. There are payment plans that are available when you go to the checkout page, which is linked there at the bottom of the slide. You're going to get a link to these links in an email that you use to register for this webinar. You'll get that within about 45 minutes, I think. I think it goes out in about 45, or it goes out within the hour, or within the next hour. If you're interested, you can sign up using this link. That link that I have right there, where it's both on the QR code and the link that I'm posting right here on the slide, this is going to give you an additional 10% off whichever registration you come in at. So if you come in at the $2,500 one, this will knock another $250 off. If you come in at $3,500 because you weren't one of the first 15, it'll knock $350 off. This is available to you all the way through the end of the day tomorrow. If by chance you can't register by the end of the day tomorrow, you want to register later on this week or next week, just reach out to me. The registration price stays the same, but I will make sure that we get you up to speed. You'll get access to the recording from Wednesday's session if you missed that, and we'll still make sure you get up to speed. All right. Like I said, it's limited to 25 students. The enrollment is going to end on tomorrow on September the 17th. And like I said, you can get 10% off by using this QR code or the link that I'm sharing right here. If you have any questions going forward from this, please feel free to send me a question. Andrew@voitanos.io. You will, like I said, you will get an email that includes a link to both the recording for this webinar and the slides, and with the 10% savings, all within about 45 to 60 minutes from now. Okay, now I want to go back and I want to answer all the questions that you guys have submitted in the chat. If you have any other questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I will be sure to answer them. The one question I just saw at the very end that popped in from Lewis, he said, I will buy a new computer, more biased towards Mac, but I can shift to a PC, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I prefer a Mac, but that is just my preference. If you want to use Windows, go for it. If you want to use Linux, God bless you. I don't know how you would do that on a laptop experience, but I know people do it. It's just that's not my cup of tea. Windows isn't my cup of tea, but it does not matter. All the stuff I do is with a Mac, but most of my students do stuff with Windows, so it does not matter. Okay, so let me slide back to the questions here and make sure that I get all of them. Let me jump back in the chat. I just want to double check and make sure I didn't miss anything. So I'm going to call your name out when I see your question. Scott Summers, Andrew, Trying to make sure I don't miss any. Greg Ehrenberg says Power Apps licensing makes your eyes cross. You and me both, man. You and me both. When licensing requires a 37-page PDF, that's not good. Lewis, your question about iframe responsiveness, I think I answered that. If I didn't, go ahead and post another question in the chat and I'll address it. Chris says that the teams look more customizable than SharePoint. I've been pretty much annoyed at how little I can do in SharePoint without global admin privileges. So you can't customize the Teams app. You can where the tab, you have full control over what's in the tab. You have full control over like what's in the dialogue when you pop open a dialogue. But you can't change like the teams, the list of all the teams on the left-hand side, stuff in the header, the navigation on the left-hand side. You can't change that stuff. This is a classic SaaS-based solution. You can't make those kinds of changes. What you can do is there is a way when you build apps, you can, if you're like selling an app, there are spots that you can kind of carve out and use like different colors and let your customer use their own brand colors and maybe change the name of your app if you want to like white label an app for like corporate use. So that is a customization you can do, but you can't go through and customize the rest of the Teams UX. It's either the default UX, the default theme, the dark theme, or the high contrast theme. Let's see. Richard said, "What all data can we save here?" So that was about halfway through. So you can't. So Teams, remember when you're building an application, whether it's a tab, a personal app, a bot, a message extension, a meeting app, no data is stored in Teams. So you're building a web app, and it is up to you to save your data wherever you want to save it. Database, SharePoint Online, SharePoint Embedded is an option. You have full access to save anything that you want in your own store. Remember, you're building a web app, be it a web app or a web service. You're still building a web app, and you host it, so you have full control over everything stored. Okay, you have full access to all of that. So Lewis says, instead of OpenAI with Teams AI library, I guess, can you point to a local LLM model instead? Yeah, sure. I mean, that's just something you would end up hosting, because remember, you're still the Teams AI library is part of your web service. So when you build your web service for your bot, you're simply using the Teams AI library, which is just like an SDK. So it's running inside of your process. If you don't want to use the Teams AI library and using OpenAI or Teams or Azure OpenAI, and you want to use a local LLM like one from like Facebook and the Olamas, you can do that. You can totally do that. Or you want to use one of the small models from Microsoft, like the Phi models, you could totally do that. There's nothing that stops you from. Now, the Teams AI library is not built to work with anything but OpenAI and Azure OpenAI. But what you do in custom code is totally up to you. We talked about that, about can we run a bot on different technology instead of Azure bot service, for example, Next.js? I answered that. Andrew Gaskell said, if the Azure bot service is just a router, why is it called a bot? It's a bot service, which basically means it's simply a community. So what you do with the Azure AI bot service, all you do is you create a registration. That registration gives your bot an ID. That's how your manifest is going to tell Teams how Teams knows to talk to your registration. And then the Azure AI bot service has an endpoint that it knows where to send the message down to. The Azure AI bot service also knows how to speak to different channels. Now, when I say channel, I don't mean a Teams channel. Teams itself is a channel, just like Facebook Messenger is a channel. Text-based messaging is a channel. A web chat interface is a channel, or Twilio for SMS. There's a whole bunch of different channels that it supports. So it just understands how to have a different communication on one side and how to marshal that with your web service. That's all it is. So the Azure AI bot service is not a place to host your bot. You don't deploy any code to the Azure AI bot service. You just register something in a database, just like Entra ID. You don't deploy code to Entra ID. You register an application there. Same thing with an Azure AI bot service. Lewis says, any alternative to low code first approach, but that is not based on Power Apps, but more true and concurrent with web development approach. The low code, no code approach is Power Apps. There is no like native app low code. Now, with that being said, if there are like other platforms out there that allow you to build a web app using a low code, no code approach, then I don't see why you couldn't use one of those. You could totally do that. Let's see here. Let me run through some of the other questions here. Adam from Poland, thank you very much for joining me. Check your media. Regarding bots in Teams, so apps can register skills only when using Azure AI Bot Library, but not using the Bot Framework SDK. So it's not that you can't register a skill using the Bot Framework SDK. It's that you're using. Let me say this a little bit different way, or it's kind of repeating what I said earlier. The Teams AI library makes it easier for you to leverage an LLM to deduce the user's intent from their prompt to map that intent to a skill or an action. If you want to do that on your own using the Bot Framework SDK, you can. It's that Microsoft has written that code using, and they've packaged it up called the Teams AI library with some stuff that they makes it easier to deduce this. But if you don't want to go with their process and you want to do your own, you could totally do that. So Lewis has another question. Level of programming skill. I think I answered that question, Lewis. So if I didn't, please ask that again. Okay, so let me try this. Konstantinos. Let's see. Great webinar. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you very much. I'd love to get your testimony or your feedback on what you thought about it. You'll see that in the email, the bottom of the email that you get in about 30-ish minutes. I showed you SharePoint Framework web parts synced to Microsoft 365, but can we do it the other way around? Code first deployed to SPO. Microsoft supposedly supports it, but how do you feel about it? Okay, great question here, Konstantinos. Now let me kind of explain a little bit of this a little bit more. So SharePoint Framework web parts are not synced to Teams. All that is done, the SharePoint Framework web part still is deployed to SharePoint and SharePoint Online, and it will run in SharePoint and get surfaced in SharePoint. The only thing that SharePoint does is it creates the Teams app package on the fly and deploys that to the Teams app catalog in your tenant. In that, when it talks about the web part, it's going to point to a special URL in your SharePoint Online tenant that's going to contain the GUID of the web part in the query string, so that when you pick the tab in Teams, in the iframe, the page that loads is coming from your SharePoint Online tenant with no branding on it, and your web part gets loaded on the page. Okay, so nothing is deployed, no code is deployed to Teams. That's not just SharePoint Framework, that's just in general. Teams doesn't host any code. Now, can I do it the other way around? Can I build a tab in Teams and deploy it to SharePoint Online? So today, yes. Tomorrow, not being literal tomorrow, but like in the future, I want to hedge a little bit. So let me explain how it works today. In Teams, when you build a web part or when you build a tab, there's an option, just like in SharePoint Framework, you can say, can this work in SharePoint? And if you say yes, it's actually, I think it's just a true false flag in your manifest. What that means is that you can now take your Teams app package and you can upload it to the SharePoint app catalog. When you deploy it, SharePoint's app catalog understands that it's a Teams tab, but it knows how to treat it as a web part. Now you go to your SharePoint Online site. When you add that tab to a page in SharePoint Online, what happens is SharePoint Online is going to render it like an isolated web part. It's going to get rendered, instead of inside of a div, it'll get rendered in an iframe, and the source of the iframe is pointing to the URL of where your Teams tab lives. So that's how your app is going to load inside of it. That's how it works today. Now, the reason why I hedge a little bit is because Microsoft about a month or so ago announced that the isolated web parts are going away and they're going to be fully retired in 2 years, in April of 2026. I've asked Microsoft and they have not explicitly said why and what is going away. And I suspect it's because of the iframe stuff. I asked them a bunch of questions. They gave me a lot of answers. Then I asked this one question that I'm going through right now, and they never responded. And I was like, sounds to me like I just touched something. So this is not breaking an NDA or anything. But when I didn't get a response, I'm like, okay, this kind of implies something. If I think that they are saying we're not going to go through and do multiple iframes on the page because with isolated web parts, because that is a performance issue and issues with like third-party cookies and stuff. Okay, fine. I got issues with that, but whatever. If that's the case, if they are going to take away iframes for web parts and isolated web parts, that, if you draw the conclusion for this where I am, that should break Teams tabs and loading on pages as well. Now, they said that they're working on something. They have not said what they're working on to mitigate this retirement of isolated web parts. What I think they might be doing is they might say you can still do single page apps in SharePoint Framework, which is what we do today, but you have the ability to run those in an iframe. Now if they can do that, then that might be what they're going to say that you can do with Teams tabs going forward. And that would make more sense because a Teams tab is going to take up like the majority of a page or the majority of the Teams client. So I would argue, does it make sense to make that a little tiny box on a SharePoint Framework page or a SharePoint Online page for where a web part would normally go? Or does it make more sense to take up the entire page like we do with a single page app in Teams, or what we call full, or in a SharePoint framework, which we call full page app pages, I think. So I don't know. Okay. I just saw your follow-up question here. Teams app runs in an iframe, and in the new Teams client, it seems to stop all built-in JavaScript dialogues and alerts. Do you know where the limitations of the iframe is documented? Basically, here's how it works. Your that wasn't supposed to show up. Your Teams app, when you build your Teams app, it will only load things from URLs that you have whitelisted, called valid domains. So it does. You can do dialogues. I mean, you can use like JavaScript alerts. I've done that inside of a Teams app. But if you don't list out the URLs that can load in that iframe, Teams will block the access to that URL. So like wherever your cloud resources are, you can't like go load it from some other location on the fly unless you've whitelisted that. And that's a way for Teams to keep things nice and secure. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me run through. I got a few more questions here. Question, Tobias, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Lewis, that was your question about the laptop. So Sakib, you say, if you want to make a CTI connector, how do we transfer the SIP call to Teams client while guessing the agent presence? Any idea? I'm sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about. SIP call, I know that's something like live meeting or like a online call. I don't know about the other stuff that you're talking about. So I apologize. Like CTI connector, I don't know what that is. So apologies. Richard Wiz said, when using a channel tab, what security measures are used so we don't want people to log in every time? So when you're using a channel tab, your user's already logged in. So you don't have to get them to log in again. You can actually ask them, you don't even have to prompt them to go log in since they're logged in. Instead, from your Teams app, you can take advantage of single sign-on and say, give me the identity of the current user that's logged in, and you will get an ID token back from Teams, the Intra ID token that was created from Intra ID, and we'll hand that back to you and to your tab, and then you could use that to go obtain an access token using like the OBO flow to get an access token for, say, Microsoft Graph using that token. Richard says, if we wanted to register an app to start dev on the Microsoft platform, what all do we need to register an app to start development on Microsoft platforms if we want to deploy app to AWS? The only thing you have to have is you will have to use Microsoft's Intra ID to register the app. No code is deployed to that, but you already have that anyway because Teams. And the reason for that is because Microsoft 365, all of Microsoft 365 and Teams, it has a trust relationship with Intra ID. So your apps have to be registered with Intra ID. Where the code runs does not matter. It does not matter at all. It could run absolutely anywhere. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Oracle's Cloud, Vercel, it doesn't matter. You can run it anywhere and it will still run. So you don't need to do anything extra to go through to make that work. The only other thing that you might need in Azure is if you're using a bot or a message extension, you have to go use the Azure AI bot service so that it has that connection piece. Vakar, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Jono. Nice to see you, Jono. What's the approach for setting configs in SharePoint Online using a Teams app? So you're gonna want to. There's a little bit of stuff that can be exposed using the property pane, but in this case here, I wouldn't do that. What I would do instead is I would have your app detect if it's inside of Teams or if it's inside of SharePoint Online, which you can do using the context. I would instead have a separate thing to where you want to change the settings and it would open the settings up. This is, and I know we've talked about this. John was one of my former students of the Accelerator. I personally am not a fan of using the SharePoint framework to build things for Teams and vice versa, because there's too many things that are a little brittle and that don't work all the time. I find like it's just better to kind of separate those two things. Things just break. Strangely, things just break. It's not terribly reliable. Technically, you can do it, but it's not terribly reliable. People run into this a lot of different times. So, but John, instead what I would do is I would like launch a pop-up or from the app inside of when you're in SharePoint Online and prompt them for settings that they want to change that way. That's how I would do it. But it all depends on the scenario. Okay, that is all the questions. I've gone for over 30 minutes past what I said what I was hoping for, or at least what my target was to make sure I got through most of the content. We got through most of the content. We did Q&A, and I talked to you about my accelerator after that 1 hour. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I would ask if you're interested in the accelerator. I hope to see you join us. I'd love to have you in our accelerator that starts on Wednesday. You can learn more about it from this link up here that you see. You can learn more from my students from the testimonials, the page on my website that is also available from this link. Furthermore, for those of you still here, if you don't already subscribe, I would ask subscribe to my YouTube channel. Give me a like on this video if you enjoyed this, if you learned something. I'm trying to do more stuff on YouTube, and the more people that are subscribing to it, the more kind of I guess it's positive reinforcement that people are telling me that they're interested in learning more about Microsoft 365 application development. If you have any questions I didn't answer, though, please feel free either, like I said, email me, andrew@voitanos.io, or drop a comment on the video that you'll see on YouTube where you can get access to this. And in about 30 minutes, you'll get an email from me, a link to the recording, a link to the slides, and everything else. Richard, you asked, when am I launching those self-paced courses I mentioned earlier? All I'm going to say is stay tuned. I'm working on them and it is my top priority. Other than my accelerator, I start teaching on Wednesday and this webinar, it is my top priority. So I'm trying to get them done as quickly as I can. I've got them all mapped out, got a lot of the code written. I'm just recording and working with my video producer to go through and to help me get that done. Finally hired a video producer so I can produce more content. And we're just trying to work out some kinks to make sure we got everything make sure that everything is working the best. I'm getting that studio content in the best way for them to be the most effective and efficient for me and for them. So we're working through it, but just stay tuned. Stay on my newsletter. I will absolutely let you know when things are available. So with that, everybody, hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate you joining me today, and I hope to run into you at some point in the future. Bye, everybody.